Who would win in a fight? Yagami or Kiryu? Well, Yagami obviously, but why even bother asking? Well, a lot of people like to pit two characters together, whether they're from the same franchise or a different one, and yada yada, you probably already know. Lots of people in the Yakuza community like to ask this question. Sometimes it's two characters who have fought already, like Saitama and Kiryu, but other times it's characters who have never met, like Mac from Yakuza 3 and Bacchus from Yakuza 0. But a question that I see get asked all the time is Yagami versus Kiryu, and it makes me angry beyond belief that the most common answer, and in fact pretty much the only answer, is Kiryu. Now, although they are both from the same franchise, Kiryu is from the Yakuza / Like a Dragon games specifically, whereas Yagami has only ever been in his two games of Judgment and Lost Judgment, of which Kiryu doesn't appear at all. There's a long story behind it, but these two characters have never been allowed to meet, but in more recent times it seems more and more likely that they will. This is because a character like Zhao from Yakuza Like a Dragon appeared in Lost Judgment, Kaito Higashi and Sugiura from Judgment and Lost Judgment appeared in Like a Dragon Gaiden, and most recently Sugiura and Sugamo from the Judgments appeared in Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. So we may soon be approaching a game where we can finally test this theory and have Kiryu and Yagami meet, but before then we can only theorize, and we'll have to tackle this theory from three separate perspectives. The first and most boring one is looking at it from a realistic perspective. Realistically, if these two were ever allowed to be in the same game, there's a plethora of reasons for them to fight. The biggest one that I can think of is that Yagami would be investigating some case and he needs to get information out of a certain person or do a certain thing, and Kiryu probably wouldn't trust him or would be simply trying to protect someone that he knows is innocent, and so then Kiryu and Yagami would fight. But now this realistic perspective basically follows a thing Stan Lee once said, where the true victor of this battle would be whoever the writers want to win. Whoever this will probably just be whoever we get to play as. For example, if they decide to add a Yagami cameo into a potential Yakuza Kiwami 3 remake, then Kiryu would win because we'd be playing as Kiryu. Or if it wasn't a sub-story thing and it would be a main story thing, which probably won't happen given Kiryu's age and health as of the most recent game unless they do a flashback, then the two of them would honestly probably tie. Something would interrupt the fight, or the two would simply settle their differences over their love of toughness Zeds or something. But now with that realistic perspective out of the way, it's time to view the lore perspective. If a 2025 game set in 2024 or 5 were to have these two face off, I'm gonna be real, Yagami would easily win without any sort of analysis on his strengths. In fact, Yagami should probably be arrested if he actually fought Kiryu, or at least I hope Ichiban would step in and beat him up, because Yagami, come on man, don't do that. But if we were to go back during the time period of Judgment and Lost Judgment, being around end of 2018 to beginning of 2022, then we can properly see more traits and characteristics that would aid either of these warriors in their battle. In the story, we know that both of them have won every fight they've been in, or at least they've not really died from a fight and stuff. We know in the story that they're both middle-aged men who are incredibly good at fighting, but we also know that who they fight and who they have fought are all different. So it's a little hard to just use story context to figure out who would win. One thing we can use though is that the two of them both learnt to fight from many years of ruffians on the street trying to pick fights with them. However, Kiryu learnt from two boxing-related legends, I guess, a woman who was infamous for being strong as hell, and a martial arts master who taught Kiryu all of his strongest techniques. Now, many of the things he knows have been self-taught, but he also has forgotten pretty much everything he's ever learned like 10 separate times. He's forgot 4 entire fighting styles, 2 of which he eventually remembered, as well as every single other one of these powerful techniques from the martial arts master. So either Kiryu's an idiot, or these are simply difficult to learn, and even a man of his capabilities struggles to commit them to memory. However, the Tiger Drop, the strongest ability in the Komaki style's arsenal and has been for centuries, is something Yagami learned from scanning a fucking QR code. Yagami also has known the Tiger and Crane style for many years, and perhaps I'm forgetting someone, but he hasn't learned from some legendary martial artist. In fact, all of the skills he has learnt haven't been from witnessing the moves firsthand and learning from practice and skill, but instead he just jumps onto his notes app and looks at a photo or reads a book in half a second, or again, scans a QR code. He also then pulls out a third fighting style out of his ass, complete with super advanced martial arts techniques that he learned from presumably just stuffing around in his office. And then he learns a fourth fighting style by getting distracted from one of his cases and rocking up into a boxing ring. And finally he had some guidance, but he figured out how to box by fighting these apparent world champions and just wiping the floor with them. So that's already 1 point for Yagami, being that he is apparently a master despite having no real training or experience, whereas Kiryu, a legend as proclaimed by every single person who ever sees him, apparently sucks at fighting and needs the same guy to remind him at least once a year every year. If we wanted to go more down the story rabbit hole, we could say that Yagami and Kiryu have been kidnapped and tortured the same amount of times, although Yagami to a lesser extent. Yagami has never been shot, but Kiryu gets cutscene gunned once a game. Yagami has never been badly stabbed stabbed, but Kiryu on each occasion he has been stabbed has been quite badly injured. You might think that Kiryu surviving all this makes him a tank, you know, like a mighty beast who can withstand all punishment. But to me, I think it's just a case of Kiryu turning his brain off in cutscenes, and Yagami being a ninja who can deflect bullets and knives, which is why he's never injured. They've fought similar enemies, like hordes of angry men trying to kill them, super strong leaders of these angry men, tigers, bears, and funnily enough, they've both fought Kaito. And over the years, Kiryu's definitely fought more, but again, he's sustained significantly more drastic injuries than Yagami, so it's hard to tell whether or not Kiryu could be considered weaker for falling, or stronger for standing. There's a lot more directly story-related things to consider, but in all honesty, it's a lot of moot points. Kiryu's been in far more games than Yagami's too. In fact, Yagami's been in so few that he wasn't even in his own DLC. And throughout all of Kiryu's games, he's had a lot of good feats, but also a lot of bad. So it's kind of unfair to both of them. I'll talk a bit more about it later, but for now, I think it's time to analyze the more interesting and more accurate perspective, being the gameplay perspective. Obviously, the first and biggest argument people like to have for Kiryu fighting another character is that Tiger Drop negates all damage. Well, if you watched my previous video, cough cough, it was really good, I promise, you'll know that not all Tiger Drops negate all damage. But in the Dragon Engine games, so all of the most recent Kiryu games, Tiger Drop only negates damage before the attack lands, and then afterwards, it doesn't do anything. But you see, Yagami also has Tiger Drop, or at least he did in Judgment, and it functioned the exact same as modern Kiryu. But Yagami honestly has better counters than Kiryu does now with the Tiger and Crane style, and if both were player controlled, you could do a Fire Emblem multiplayer moment and just sit there and wait for your opponent to approach you so you can counter them, but that'd be quite boring. So let's just assume that they both can still counterattack each other, but they're not just going to sit there endlessly like, swing first dude, no you swing first. But what should actually be the first and most important consideration is that Yagami again has only ever had 2 appearances, but Kiryu has had 12 playable appearances, 14 if you want to count Miyamoto, Musashi and Kenzan, or Sakamoto, Ryoma and Ishin, 15 if you want to count Ishin Kiwami as a separate game, perhaps even 16 if you want to count the Kiryu skin plus his voice actor playing Kenshiro in Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, 22 if you want to count the HD versions of Yakuza 1 and 2, as well as the remastered versions of Yakuza 3, 4 and 5, and if you want to be really pedantic, 23 or more if you count stuff like Project X Zone or Super Monkey Ball or whatever. But across all of these many appearances of Kiryu, he has had many strengths, many weaknesses, many abilities, and many gameplay mechanics. How exactly he fights even varies between games too. If we were to just say Dead Cells Kiryu fought Yagami, obviously Kiryu could easily win because he'd just shoot him with his big AS-50, which would instantly kill Yagami. Then if we were to say Infinite Wealth Kiryu, Kiryu could either win or lose very easily, because if they were both forced to take turns, Yagami would get clapped by Kiryu, who actually has skills and stuff like Burning Arrow, and also because the Dragon Job at Infinite Wealth is OP. Or what could happen is that Kiryu would try to take turns and Yagami would just beat him up, even though it's not his turn. So Kiryu is quite inconsistent between all of his many appearances, but Yagami across his 2 is pretty easy to keep consistent. I mean, realistically, Lost Judgment Yagami is better than Judgment Yagami in almost every way, losing out on only a few things, but still, at least he's consistent. So it would be fair to Yagami to just pick his Lost Judgment appearance, but it wouldn't be fair to Kiryu to just pick a single appearance of his. I mean, even if I did both the first or most recent, Judgment Yagami would destroy Yakuza 1 Kiryu, given how that game is lacking a shitload of mechanics and abilities that later games ended up adding, like how that game had like 9 inventory spaces, for example. But then again, Infinite Wealth Kiryu could either destroy or get destroyed by Lost Judgment Yagami. So instead, what I'll actually do for both of these lads is consider many different options across their various games, taking into account mostly the best versions of whatever specific thing I'm talking about. We'll pretend that both of these gamers have all 4 of their fighting styles, plus Kiryu's agent style, so no Ryoma gun style, because again it's basically cheating, and the 2 versions of Kiryu's dragon style are basically combined. Furthermore, I could consider saying Kiryu has access to all skills from Infinite Wealth, but if he were to do most of them in any action setting, they're all quite slow and Yagami could evade them or just punch Kiryu while he's doing a big wind-up animation. So basically I just think of those as like unblockable attacks from Tekken, so they're not really worth doing. So first of all, I'll start with their basic stuff, as in like light attacks, finishes, all that stuff, and we'll just keep going on from there. To start, thanks to Gaiden, they're both pretty similar in regards to basic attacks. Kiryu with his Dragon style, or Yakuza style as it was called in Gaiden, can do triple finishes, and you can also juggle enemies in the air in Gaiden. These 2 things are things that Yagami has always had ever since Judgment. Yakuza Kiwami has an ability that makes your combo speed go super fast. Lost Judgment has the exact same thing. In Kiwami, you can instantly swap fighting styles. Lost Judgment, you can't do the same thing, but of all the games, it is actually the fastest to swap between styles. So fast, in fact, that compared to all of the other games, you can do a a full rotation of all 4 fighting styles in Lost Judgment faster than you can just swap between 2 fighting styles in another game. Lost Judgment's super combo speed buff is also triggered by just dodging an attack in Crane style, whereas Kiwami's requires you to consume all heat. It's active in all styles in both games, but in Lost Judgment it is incredibly easy to maintain that speed buff forever. Juggling is also kinda equal between the games. You can do it for longer in Lost Judgment, but it's much easier in Gaiden. Damage drop-off is basically the same between the two though, or at least it seems to be. But also Yagami's triple finishes are much more reliable than some of the kind of weird ones in Gaiden. Every finisher with the Tiger style can break guards, and if Yagami is at max health he can just pierce guards anyway. Snake's charge finishes can inflict agony. You can kind of see that Yagami already has a fair few advantages over Kiryu. However, Kiryu does have the silly forward evade strike with his Yakuza 6, Kiwami 2, and Gaiden Dragon style, which can also inflict agony in Gaiden. Furthermore, although you can't in 6 and Gaiden, Kiryu can equip weapons from his pockets, including guns and knives. Yagami cannot do any of that. They both can pick up weapons off the street, with Kiryu being able to freely pick up motorcycles and scooters in Beast style, but when not in Beast style, Kiryu has to be in extreme heat to pick up bikes and scooters, with Yagami also needing to do the same thing. But with Kiryu's pocket knives and pocket guns and pocket spears or whatever he's got, Yagami can grab him and disarm him either with the Snake style, or if it's Judgment Yagami, he can simply do that by just grabbing him. They also both have the ability to do disarming heat actions to get rid of the other person's weapon, although with the Snake style, Yagami will then use the weapon himself so long as it's a blunt object, but with Kiryu, he will break the weapon most of the time. Yagami also has the silly mortal wounds mechanic, which technically Kiryu could abuse by just shooting him, but even if I were to go with that and not say, well, they removed it in Lost Judgment, Judgment Yagami could activate EX boost and become invincible, or Lost Judgment Yagami wouldn't even need any heat and can just jump in the Crane style and become immune to bullets. But Kiryu also has the Daidoji gadgets. He could chuck a bomb at Yagami and Yagami would only have a couple of options to deal with that, but he especially would have a hard time dealing with the extreme heat version of the cigarette bomb. The drones Yagami can block, which we know from the Armon fight in Gaiden, and the wire gadget, Yagami could again just probably jump in Crane and get right out of that shit. Furthermore, if Yagami was in Crane, he can actually use that technique to just jump out of a juggle combo that Kiryu would be trying to do. Both of them have parries, with Kiryu's Yakuza 6 Dragon parry and the old Rush style parry being pretty much the same thing as Yagami's Snake parry. While Ryoma can get an invincibility buff from a parry, Kiryu doesn't get any sort of buff from these parries. However, Yagami can get unbreakable super armor as a buff from parrying with Snake, and much like that Crane super speed buff, this is a super easy thing to maintain forever. But then in terms of R1 plus circle parries that the two have, Kiryu has Komaki parry, which can be done at any time and could be used to counter Yagami, whereas Yagami only has secret technique Twist and Viper, which can only be used when he's not in heat mode. Yagami can guard break with a shitload of his normal attacks, even just light attacks, but Judgment Yagami could guard break with any charged finisher and stun his opponents, although in Lost Judgment stunning is made much more difficult in comparison. But Kiryu can just stun Yagami by Komaki parrying him or doing the old backwards evade strike. However, while Kiryu can't do dick when he's stunned, Yagami can summon his dog friend to attack Kiryu, who of course would probably start crying because he misses Mame, which same Kiryu, I miss him too. But Yagami can only do that a max of 10 times because he can only carry 10 bags of dog food on him, which is hilarious to think about. Kiryu also has access to finishing holds or bounding throws depending on which game you play. Yagami doesn't have anything like that, which as a side note, I kind of feel like they got rid of that because they made juggling possible, and maybe that's why you can only do it in extreme heat in Gaiden, but hey, that's just a theory. But speaking of which, before Yakuza 6, Kiryu had the red thing, the this made him completely invincible and gave him what is still to this day the most bizarre looking attack animations in any video game I've ever played. He then later got Extreme Heat, which is more or less the same idea as that thing from Yakuza 5, and although he's not invincible, Kiryu can't die while it's active. Lost Judgment Yagami is the exact same as Extreme Heat Kiryu, but in Judgment he was invincible too. However, being hit didn't deflect the hit and instead would drain his heat. Judgment's EX boost also boosted combo speed. Both of them can regenerate their heat during their respective extreme boosts by taunting, although Yagami can actually generate more heat during his boost by doing Flux Fissure, which I can say right now that if it's Judgment's Flux Fissure, Kiryu might be completely flucked. But anyway, both of them could also regenerate heat by consuming healing items, which if we were to go pre-Dragon Engine Kiryu, Yagami would definitely have an unfair advantage, but we're not, so that means that Kiryu can actually hold significantly more healing items than Yagami, as they can both store 10 of each food, but Kiryu can hold way more actual healing items and gains access to much higher tiered variants of them. Kiryu also can equip the War God Talisman and constantly regenerate heat when outside of extreme heat, as well as whatever other overpowered gear he wants, which Yagami doesn't really get. Judgment Yagami couldn't equip any gear, but Lost Judgment Yagami could only equip gear that just alters stats and don't have any special effects. But what Yagami does get is the ability to do a leapfrog attack against Kiryu, which unless he does the annoying bullshit bosses can do where they throw Yagami, there's nothing Kiryu can do about that. But even if he does get that annoying boss shit, Yagami can at least do the leapfrog heat action to Kiryu, and again, there's nothing he can do. Yagami can also do wall jump attacks, which are incredibly strong, but Kiryu could probably counter or do the rush/dragon engine parry against him. They both can do their own get-up attacks and heat actions, but Kiryu couldn't actually do any follow-up attacks to Yagami in the snake style, as he can do serpent hold against him. Yagami, however, could theoretically kick Kiryu in the head quite safely. They also both have grab reversal, so grabs are risky for both of them. In terms of evasion, they're both more or less just as evasive as each other, but Kiryu's little slides he can do with Rush and the new Dragon style are a bit better than what Yagami has. They both have a knockback technique of some sort, with Kiryu's Komaki knockback and Dragon, as well as a couple of others, and Yagami's guard reversal and Tiger. Yagami's, however, is much stronger, and if he were to get a perfect guard, he could flux fissure off of it. Although Kiryu can still do a perfect guard in the Beast style, which is itself a form of knockback technique. Both of them can kick and throw weapons and objects at each other, but Yagami has another form of reversal by using projectile counter in Crane, where he will throw the object right back at Kiryu. Yagami needs to be an EX boost to throw back motorcycles and stuff, but he can indeed still catch them and not have to worry about getting hit by them. But one other attack reversal that Kiryu has is his ability to evade an EX boost with the Agent style, which will let him do a little counter hit. They can both sprint, but they also can both grant themselves some faster movement. Kiryu can freely use his little rocket boots to zip around, and Yagami can use his skateboard, although it has to be during EX boost for whatever reason. But then everything not specifically mentioned here was because, in reality, both Yagami and Kiryu have many identical tools, like them both having evade strikes, for example. This is mostly thanks to RGG Studio reusing everything all the time, but some things do differ. Some things Kiryu has the upper hand with, but most things Yagami does instead. Yagami also, despite having less games and less styles, probably has way more tools at his disposal than Kiryu does, because they went insane with giving him a million unique skills in Lost Judgment. But even if you're still not convinced by Yagami's massive advantages over Kiryu, there is one very important thing to be aware of. Yes, Kiryu can just shoot Yagami, but he can just jump and avoid the bullets, presumably until he can disarm Kiryu or until Kiryu runs out of ammo. Yes, Kiryu can stab Yagami or slice him up with a sword, but Yagami could just parry with Snake and disarm Kiryu at the same time. But there's something that Yagami has that Kiryu cannot under any circumstances do anything about. Extracts.
Let's find the game lost. All the people crying pain. Try to live your life and decide when I go by. Turning what's thinking, turning your way, and it's always here. One more time world, there's a price to save. To hide on the soul, and the sun goes out with all my faults. So where's your feeling and where is your life? A cross-hand drug nobody's ever seen.
Yagami, quite literally, has superpowers, and Kiryu cannot do a single thing against any of these superpowers. He's got way more than what I mentioned too, that he could just easily list off and use to beat Kiryu. If Kiryu can gain access to all of his best tools, then Yagami can use any of his extracts, and Kiryu would be quite plainly fucked. Oh, but the insta-kill doesn't actually one-shot bosses. Kiryu's not a boss. He's only got one health bar and no QTEs. And if you say he does, okay, then so does Yagami. Oh, but let's not count extracts. Oh, but let's not count this or that. Let's create a whole bunch of caveats so that Kiryu could somehow miraculously win, even though every single odd is stacked against him. No, let's not do that, because we're mature adults and we're not here to play favorites. If we were, I would have had a whole video explaining why Shinada, Joon-gi Han, or Kaito would win or something. Pretty much everything Kiryu has, Yagami has some sort of bullshit counter to. And pretty much all of Yagami's bullshit, Kiryu has nothing he can do against it. Yagami is, and probably for quite a while will remain, the most overpowered character in the series. And you know what the craziest thing about that is? Kiryu is touted as some sort of legend. He's like an unkillable war hero who's displayed impossible feats of strength, never to be beaten by anyone. Yagami is just literally some guy who can do everything Kiryu can but better, plus a shitload more. But we'll finally move on from the gameplay perspective and sit down and continue our story or lore perspective, but with a very important and realistic consideration. The truth of it all really is that Yagami was written by a team of writers who were just fresh from Yakuza 0, Yakuza 6, and although the script was the same as the original, Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2. Yakuza 0 Kiryu was all about his rise to becoming a legend, even though realistically most of that legend status was acquired off-screen between 0 and the start of 1, but whatever. Then Yakuza 6 was about this big legend's final stand, showing to everyone that he always has and always will be a force to be reckoned with. But then in the original Yakuza 1, Kiryu was this flawless being who could do anything and everything because they obviously wanted to make him cool, which then Yakuza 2 carried over a little bit, especially with Kiryu being known for the first time as the 5th chairman of the Tojo clan. So after 4 games in a row of having an overpowered character who stands against all odds, they wrote Yagami, an overpowered character who stands against all odds. Now, of course, that's a common theme amongst all of the protagonists of the Yakuza games, being that they're always capable of rising to the top and yada yada. But Akiyama, Saejima, Tanimura, Shinada, and Ichiban are all examples of characters who are very flawed in many ways. Akiyama's lazy, Saejima's traumatized, Tanimura's too sexy, Shinada's a bum, and Ichiban's whole character is that he is flawed, which is what makes him Ichiban. What's Kiryu's biggest flaw? Most people would probably say that he's an absolute dumb shit, but that's realistically the writers of whichever game being dumb shits, and it isn't an intentionally written aspect about him. Besides that though, most things that ever go wrong in his life will be someone else's fault, or will be something like him being too kind and trying to protect someone else. He never went to jail in Yakuza 1 for his own hubris or mistakes, he went to cover someone else's ass. And Yagami's the same. What's his biggest flaw? He failed as a lawyer? No, he didn't. He was actually so good as a lawyer that it turned around and smacked him in the face. He's more of an ace detective than Junpei Iori. He is a masterful fighter. He's apparently amazing with women, much to my dismay as someone who doesn't give a shit about that mechanic. At the end of both games, the only thing Yagami ever does wrong is that he still can't pay his bloody landlord despite making 20 billion yen from doing like 2 sub-stories. Both of them show the willingness to risk their own lives to help protect another, which again, if the two were to fight, that flaw won't make them lose or anything like that. They're both against killing innocent people, more so Yagami than Kiryu, so their fight wouldn't actually end with fatal violence. But where Kiryu's biggest enemies are things like the CIA, various somewhat comically depicted criminal organizations, and his complete lack of riz, Yagami's biggest ops are quite realistically depicted, although in a fictional context, government of Japan. On both occasions, by the way. You see, Yagami fought criminals, but he never had to have the whole underworld of China, Korea, and Japan after him. But at the same time, Kiryu fought the law, and to put it quite plainly, the law won. They both have accomplished the same feats of power, like I said earlier. They both can pick up motorcycles, they both can send fully grown men flying, they both fought tigers and bears. But from the perspective of a Japanese writer, you got one guy who is basically a superhero doing superhero things, and a dude who's all about fighting the battles that this writer, as a citizen of Japan, very likely could deal with. They're both for the people in one way or another, but Yagami is significantly more the people's hero. Obviously, the Yakuza do exist, but someone who works at Sega of Japan probably would never have to face off against a sexy man from Korea who is trying to kill him. Well, maybe at least. But this Sega guy very likely will have to, at some point, or already has, faced off against the dogshit legal system that they have in Japan. As an Australian, Goku can fight all manners of superhero in the world, and I could think he's the strongest guy ever, but this dude here punched a kangaroo in the face, so I think he's the true legend. Kangaroos are annoying little bastards. We love them, but at the same time, you'll struggle to find an Aussie who doesn't want to tiger drop a kangaroo into next week. So in the eyes of this Japanese writer, Yagami's the superhero. Yagami fights for them, Kiryu fights for him. But as proven by Yakuza Like a Dragon when Ichiban fought Kiryu, even though Ichiban quite plainly won, the writers aren't willing to abandon this legendary status of their pride and joy. So the better question is not, who would win between Yagami and Kiryu? Instead, who would win? The idol or the hero? The man or the myth? The detective or the detected? See, that was a really clever joke because Kiryu sucks at hiding his identity. So with all that being said, the true victor between Yagami and Kiryu is something that we will never know until it happens. And when it does happen, no matter who wins, there'll likely be some heavy bullshit involved. Kiryu might get suddenly shot in the cutscene, Yagami might get distracted by Kaito's dumpy, or they'll more than likely end in some sort of cliffhanger draw. Who knows? I know. And that's that Yagami would win because he has superpowers. He literally can instantly kill Kiryu. Yagami would win. Kiryu doesn't even stand a chance against him.